A safe haven becomes a death trap as a football pitch in Sarajevo is shelled, killing 11. If the West can't stop the killing, should it relax its policy towards those who wish to flee? Good evening. Bosnians weren't the only ones to die. 2 aid workers were killed as the bloody war in Bosnia appears to be drifting towards anarchy. Meanwhile, European leaders met today to discuss ways of tightening up EC rules on immigration. But will that leave Bosnia's beleaguered Muslims condemned to live in a war zone with no escape, like rats in a trap? Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, former UN High Commissioner for Refugees, tells us the West's latest policies are a recipe for an explosive situation. And Britain's immigration minister will be spelling out why the government believes it has to take a tough line on refugees. Also, after Tory MP Winston Churchill's outburst over immigration this weekend, Muslims here in Britain tell of a newfound sense of vulnerability as they see fellow followers of Islam under attack in Bosnia. Players and spectators at a harmless game of football in Bosnia's besieged capital, Sarajevo, became the victims of a shelling today. And 2 Danish aid convoy drivers were killed. Their deaths follow those of 3 Italian aid workers yesterday. Meanwhile, Western diplomats said they're hoping to put a draft UN resolution through the Security Council tomorrow, authorising the use of force to protect safe havens in Bosnia. But for the moment, Western policy appears at a loss to stop the mayhem on the ground, and with it the growing number of people seeking to escape from it. Today, EC ministers met in Copenhagen to discuss the rising tide of refugees from Eastern Europe and the former Yugoslavia in particular. They agreed tough new guidelines to combat illegal immigration. Mark Urban reports on the West's dilemma.
In Magli in central Bosnia today, artillery shells killed 2 Danish civilian drivers and their interpreter. The culprits aren't known, but were most likely Serb. Their deaths followed Saturday's incident in which Muslims are believed to have killed 3 Italians. The worsening security situation is making it harder and harder for the international community to get aid through.
Because of the sort of hardening of attitudes on checkpoints and what have you, it has sort of made people a little bit nervous about the movement around, and also the criminal element is now running riot, really. They've got very little restrictions on them. So there's an increase in hijackings of aid vehicles, which seem to be at the moment going totally unchecked by either side. We're very restricted on the times now that we can move safely.
UN troops were sent here to escort convoys 6 months ago, but the conflict is changing, making their task much tougher. Until earlier this year, the Muslims and Croats maintained a united front against the Serbs in most places. That provided the international community with a sizable area through which its convoys could move freely. As the Muslim-Croat alliance has fallen apart, fighting between the former allies has made it much tougher for the UN to get its convoys through. The foreign ministers' meeting in Washington last month signalled a Western consensus to press ahead with safe areas for the Muslims without further Western military intervention. Many Bosnian Muslims saw that as a sellout, and the Croats and Serbs may well have regarded it as a green light to achieve their final military aims in Bosnia.
The Washington Agreement has basically opted for the acceptance of facts on the ground and for the practical division of Bosnia. Despite all the claims of Western governments that the Van's own plan is still on the table, everyone knows that there is no willingness to implement any of its provisions.
The Serbian determination to keep on pressuring the Muslims produced carnage today when 11 people were killed as shells fell at a football match in Sarajevo. With Croatians and Serbs keeping up their pressure on remaining Muslim enclaves, the prospect facing the international community now is of a new tide of refugees. In London, many experts believe the apparent determination of European community countries to keep out refugees is short-sighted and damaging.
The EC is very active indeed on measures which are to do with border control, to do with expulsion, are to do with the restrictive agenda. It's far less imaginative and creative on what is now a permanent fact of international life, permanent for the next 20, 30 years. There are going to be gross violations of human rights, possibly near us. There are going to be firestorms in Eastern Europe, ethnic and religious conflicts. The thing is not in focus yet as a fact of international life on the permanent level.
The war has made about 1 million refugees. About 70,000 have gone to Switzerland, 60,000 to Austria, and 250,000 to Germany. Britain's contribution has been more modest. 700 Bosnians have been given asylum here, well below the number which could have come, a phenomenon blamed on red tape and Britain's apparent undesirability as a refuge. A group of those who are here told me this evening of their frustration with British and European policies towards them.
I would like to go back to my country, but the promises given have not been fulfilled.
I do feel welcome, but because I've been cheated, I feel worse than in the camp in Manjača. When I was in the camp, I knew nothing about my family, but I hoped for the best. Now I fear the worst. I've got 2 disabled sons I was looking after. Under the law, they should be able to join me. I've also got 1 daughter-in-law in Slovenia, and the other still in Bosnia.
Everything I've worked for is gone. The only thing I have left is my family, and I want to have them here to be reunited, and that's what I've been promised. If there was a proper state and a proper government, I'd like to go home to the piece of land my grandfather had.
For these 5 Bosnian Muslims, the photographs of their arrival in Britain remind them of a false dawn. With the intensification of the fighting and increased difficulties for the humanitarian effort, their experience is likely to be shared by thousands more.
Mark Urban reporting. Well, I'm joined now from Geneva by Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan. Prince Sadruddin, you have been highly critical of the West, but isn't the European position, in fact, the only viable, realistic one that they can take?
I'm not sure, you know. I think today, when you think of this tragedy, you feel inevitably that so much could have been done to draw the line somewhere, and that basically it's a recipe for disaster, what's been happening in the last few years, in the sense that we all knew what would happen in Yugoslavia. And 2 years ago already, the stage was set for the beginning of this ultra-nationalist drive and ethnic cleansing. So if the West wanted to prevent disaster, a lot more should have been done. There should have been high-level consultations, and there should have been credible threats behind diplomacy, because diplomacy without any credible threats is no diplomacy at all.
All right, briefly, what should the West do now that it has lost some opportunities?
Well, we have the Vance-Owen plan. Is it dead? Is it still alive? The meeting which took place 10 days ago, this mini-summit where we heard the latest statements of the 5 foreign ministers, gave some hope, in the sense that it was based on a redefinition of the UNPROFOR mandate, new rules of engagement, protection of the UN troops on the ground, safe havens, and of course that has not yet been implemented. There's been a reluctance to get on with it. It seems to me that that would be the starting point, and these besieged cities should be liberated. People should no longer be held hostage in the way they are, depending on handouts and international charity to survive.
Just on the question of refugees, do you have some sympathy with European governments who are trying to limit the number of Bosnian refugees and refugees from other parts of Eastern Europe who are coming in growing numbers into the EC?
Here again you see the people who are caught in this terrible tragedy of the former Yugoslavia are in a way in a diplomatic no man's land. On the one hand, they've lost their homes. They can't go back, certainly for the time being. And at the same time, Europe is closing its doors. I can sympathize with the European position. At the same time, if you don't address the root causes of the refugee problem, not only in Europe, but also in developing countries, you're bound to have more and more displaced persons and more uprooted peoples around the world.
Which presents the greater danger, do you think, to the EC, to let in these refugees and risk a violent backlash in countries like Germany, as we've already seen, or to have them setting up refugee camps all around Europe and having a fortress Europe?
You know, on the whole, I think experience shows that when refugees have really been driven by despair, they resort to the politics of despair. And either they get to countries where they hope to be able to start a new life, or else they are victims of all kinds of provocation and terrorism because of the hopelessness of their situation. And what I'm afraid of is that we may have a new Palestinian situation developing right in the heart of Europe. And that is, I think, again, proof of the fact that unless you do much more prevention, particularly in refugee work, you're going to be continually faced with new exodus.
Prince Sadruddin, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now from Copenhagen by Charles Wardle, the Home Office Minister who is responsible for refugees and for immigration. Charles Wardle, I don't know if you were able to hear Prince Sadruddin, but he was just saying that he feared that we could have a Jordanian-Palestinian situation as far as refugees are concerned developing in Europe. How great a risk is there of that happening?
Well, undoubtedly, there are great pressures on migration, not just from former Yugoslavia, but right the way across Europe and from other parts of the world. It is a growing problem, and a problem which we have to look at steadily. By the way, Sue, I couldn't see your film, and I couldn't hear your commentary either.
Well, I'm sorry that you were unable to hear us, but you would therefore agree that there is a danger of a fortress Europe and perhaps of a refugee problem similar to that in Jordan, for instance, developing?
No, I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's a case of fortress Europe at all. I think one wants to bear in mind the strong humanitarian effort that members of the international community and certainly all of the European community is contributing towards the terrible problems in former Yugoslavia. So far as Britain is concerned, we've led the way with our humanitarian effort, with a lot of technical assistance, with a lot of military assistance, with medical care, but also...
But we've had very few refugees that we're accepting over here from places like Bosnia.
In 1992, some 50,000 people came to the United Kingdom from former Yugoslavia, of which about 6,000 applied for asylum status. And on top of that, of course, we have been cooperating with UNHCR on the most harrowing cases from the detainees from the refugee camps. We offered to take 4,000. So far, the International Red Cross and UNHCR have offered us
Germany's got
some
250,000. I mean, ours is tiny compared to that.
Yes, that, of course, is absolutely different. In Germany, before the conflict began, there were 700,000 guest workers from former Yugoslavia. There was no decision on the part of the German government or any German politician to say, let's encourage more people to come over. Several 100,000 more just arrived. It was a question of geography.
Is it not the case that what you've really been discussing, you and other ministers today in Copenhagen, is ways of tightening up the rules and keeping more of them out?
No, today's meeting hasn't been in response to what has been happening in the last few days or last few weeks in Yugoslavia or elsewhere. It's a routine 6-monthly meeting. The idea certainly isn't one of fortress Europe. Our own immigration laws are already in place. What we do at these meetings is compare notes and talk about ways in which we can harmonize our policies across Europe, but there are no changes to British law which already stands.
Which do you think offers or poses the greater risk to Britain and to the rest of Europe to let in many of these refugees and risk the kind of violent backlash that we've seen in Germany, for instance, or to keep the vast majority of them out and have them acting rather like refugee camps, rather like in Jordan over the Palestinian question?
I'm not sure that parallel applies, and I'd put the emphasis differently. I think what we have to do is help in every way we can in former Yugoslavia. Even UNHCR have suggested it's most important that the great majority of people displaced by this terrible conflict stay as near to their homes as possible. If they don't, those pursuing the evil goal of ethnic cleansing will have their way. That, I think, is the first thing. The second point is that firm but fair immigration controls, such as we have in the United Kingdom, provide a sure basis that will minimize racial and ethnic tensions, and that is something of which we must always be mindful.
Charles Wardle, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the plight of Bosnia's Muslims and the murder of 5 Turkish Muslims in Germany has made many followers of Islam here feel that they too are under threat. Today, Saudi Arabia's King Fahd warned that emotive and ill-founded antagonism towards Islam would threaten the interests of everyone and deepen the rifts between Muslim and non-Muslim countries. Meanwhile, Tory MP Winston Churchill has demanded a halt to immigration, stressing there were now over 2 million Muslims in Britain. So do British Muslims feel they're becoming victims of a new Western religious demonology? Here's David Sells.
Dunbartonshire's amateur golf champion is a pillar of the Glasgow establishment and a devout Muslim. Bashir Mand left Pakistan 40 years ago and has been in Scotland ever since. He's 66 years old, a businessman now retired, but his entry in Who's Who is gold-plated. A Deputy Lord Lieutenant, 15 years a Labour councillor, chairman of the Strathclyde Community Relations Council, umpteen years a magistrate, and author of a book, The New Scots. He keeps his prayer mat in the club secretary's office at Douglas Park. Rarely can a Muslim transplant have taken root so successfully.
That's the cup for the Dumbartonshire Seniors Championship.
But you're Dumbarton amateur champion, eh?
Aye.
All the more of a shock, then, to find our cup winner so personally unsettled by the war in Bosnia.
I always was very confident, very happy of being a Scot, living in Scotland. And being a Muslim also, being a Muslim Scot, or Scottish Muslim. But I think since the Bosnian problem, my confidence has been shaken. Because I think if it can happen to Muslims in Bosnia, and I would like to emphasize that I believe what is happening in Bosnia is happening because those people call themselves Muslims. And I think if that can happen there, God forbid, it can happen anywhere else.
I'm a very, very kind of apologetic Muslim. I've never felt any of the fears and any of the feelings that a lot of Muslim people feel here, although I was born a Muslim. But I am now going through life feeling extremely frightened for myself and my child. And Bosnia has done it for me.
I think it's become a metaphor for Muslims in today's world, a metaphor for what's happening in other parts of the world.
A metaphor?
A metaphor, in the sense that you see Muslims under pressure, Muslim suffering in Kashmir, in Palestine, in parts of Central Asia. So it typifies, it exemplifies the Muslim fate today.
In viewing the mayhem of Bosnia, British Muslims, it is true, tend to be blinkered and partial, ignoring what Serbs have done to Croats and Croats to Serbs. They see only Muslims as victims, though Serbo-Croat complicity more and more makes their case. In Ayodhya, India, fanatic Hindus destroy a mosque and add to the paranoia. Israelis clobber Palestinian Muslims in Jerusalem. The Gulf War is seen as a Christian colonial assault on a Muslim power, an assault which led to some homegrown British thuggery and mosque burning. And then, of course, in the merry month of May, John Major received Salman Rushdie. A meeting that went down like a red rag to an Ayatollah. British Muslims were livid. Like their co-religionaries elsewhere, they are only too conscious of Islam's decay over the last half-millennium. And despite the fact that a Muslim revival in the world is now clearly underway, they still feel themselves to be a threatened and insulted species, with the enemy lurking everywhere. Matching their suspicions, it has to be said, are those of many non-Muslim Europeans, Americans and so on, who are wont to see Islam's revival as a wholesale menace, to sniff Islamic fundamentalism in every mosque, and to consider the late Ayatollah Khomeini as the evil genius of the age. They too have their demons. Khomeini did give a huge fillip to his religion, though Sunni Muslims, the vast majority, took little note of the old Shiite mullah. Iran itself remains a bogey state, arming its women to fight for Islam, whilst elsewhere non-Muslims decry the way they're swaddled in garments and kept at home by the dominant male. Hezbollah is redolent of hostages and terrorism, which reminds us of President Gaddafi of Libya, a mischievous Muslim par excellence. Then there's the Rushdie business. Not only did Khomeini sentence him to death, but fanatic British disciples burned the satanic verses with inquisitorial fervour, or so it seemed.
If you could just try it once more, please.
Here, back in Bosnia, Muslims are redefining their identity and rediscovering their religion, not in joy, but in sorrow. They have found themselves the victims in a war of extermination, which to them has all the hallmarks of a crusade. And after more than a year of vacillation, Western powers have done nothing to stop the slaughter. Who can be surprised if there are now some militant Muslim voices calling for a jihad?
We found Professor Ahmed recording his commentary for a BBC series called Living Islam, an attempt to give a rounded picture of the religion and rescue it from the demonic image which irks many British Muslims.
Today, where we stand, as seen in the media, the West does see Islam as a frightening force, a force of almost a threat, something that is undesirable, that is threatening, that is extreme, that is fanatical. And Muslims, in turn, see a kind of mirror image. They see the West as threatening, as hostile to their interests. And there is this mutual misapprehension, mutual misunderstanding.
Our religion teaches us to be intelligent, be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery.
The recorded voice of Malcolm X, the American black Muslim, promising brotherly love and violent death in equal measure. Touch me or my religion, and you head for the cemetery. Ayatollah Khomeini, he of the Rushdie fatwa, could not have put it more fondly. The group, Fundamental, are all British lads. Their gig was at the Glasgow Cat House. Two are Muslims, and they sing in praise of Muslim identity and Eastern roots. But even these amiable youngsters can't resist a sting in the tail. Mess with me faith, me put a bullet in your chest.
We have got something to offer, you know, and we've got a lot more to offer than you think we've got to offer. And give us that chance. And if you don't give us that chance, well, then it's cool because we can disappear into our own communities. We can look after ourselves. You know, there's no problem about that. And it's you, and you're responsible for that because you're not letting us in. A lot of Muslim people are re-identifying with who they really are. Whether they're practicing or not is, you know, is important, but it's irrelevant politically. And they're getting together and they're suddenly realizing who the real enemy is. Definitely. And who the people are who are trying to, like, you know, destroy them and make them lose these things what are really important to them.
Who's the real enemy?
Well, they just see the West as the real enemy.
And the Brick Lane posters reflect a sometimes embattled community. There are between 1.5 and 2 million Muslims in Britain today, an estimate, nobody's quite sure. Many of them children, most are from Pakistan, Bangladesh and India. London's Brick Lane is a haven long colonised. The older ones came to find work, often not intending to stay. Their children have been born and bred here, but remain, many of them, cocooned in their communities. That said, the context of their lives is Britain.
If you're a woman, it's very difficult.
And the context can make a real difference, particularly for Muslim women, as we found at the Bethnal Green Training Institute in East London. Women are one of the great stereotypes of Islam, popularly seen as enjoying second-class status. A mixed class, mainly of women, was being taught English with jobs in mind. The idea in itself of a job marks a huge cultural change from Somalia, Eritrea and Bangladesh.
You know, you said that there are some parts of you can't change. What are they?
My religion. I wear, you know, in what's called in trousers, but I can't wear skate.
All right. So you wouldn't change your religion.
I can't. Never. I can't do that.
But there are some things you would change about yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Like what?
The change, you know, to work, right? To find work, to speak to the people. Friend, you know, some people say I don't want to be friend English people, but I do.
But if you lived in Somalia, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now.
No.
So is that good?
Yes, of course.
What articulate Muslim women here are keen to emphasize is that the image of them as an oppressed class penned up in male-dominated homes and packaged like parcels into arranged marriages is a stereotype and has nothing essentially to do with Islam. Where they happen, such things are cultural, not religious relics of village life in Pakistan and Bangladesh.
I think as a result of the satanic verses and this demonization of Islam, I think Muslim women are now finding it much more difficult to assert their rights, because now there's a sort of beleaguered community feeling. But there is progress being made in the most unlikely groups for survival, because economically every family now that I know of needs to have two people earning. Yeah, the men are increasingly likely to be unemployed. And so economics is forcing a change upon families, and women are changing. Once they become economically more powerful, they become powerful in all sorts of other ways. But the change isn't registered by the media, and most people still like to think of us and other Muslim women as these very silent, oppressed, manipulated women, which I think is very sad. It's not true.
How deeply do you think are the stereotypes of Muslims in this country, the stereotypes amongst the host community, how deeply are they resented?
The fact is that the image of the Muslim has created a real fear, that it is making monsters of them. And when you make monsters of people, it's very easy to justify destroying them. On the other hand, what happens within the communities is that fear makes it very easy for the more extreme, if you like, fundamentalist leaders to exploit that fear and use it for their own political advancement. So they say, as I've heard them say, you see how the West shows you? You see, they're out to destroy you. Your only salvation is to be as extremist as this. Join this party, join this group, and hate everything that the West stands for.
The prince of such exploiters is the redoubtable Dr. Khalim Siddiqui, once of Pakistan, now Iran's favourite son on British soil. He plays the fanatic with skill and is much resented by moderate Muslims for giving them a bad name. We heard him in action in Rochdale, and you could see what they meant.
We must learn the lessons of history. The lessons of history are very simple and very cruel, and that is simply this, that the European civilization, the Western civilization, is a cruel civilization, is a killing machine, is a slaughterhouse for mankind. Bosnia is part and parcel of a gruesome record of killing by Europe, and now in Europe, and killing of Muslims comes very easily to them.
The savaging he gets from British newspapers does Dr. Siddiqui a power of good with his own following. There is a dearth of leadership in the British Muslim community. Dr. Siddiqui is staking out his claim in his own inimitable way.
Muslims are deeply emotionally involved in all these issues everywhere, whether they be in Palestine, in Kashmir, in Bosnia, or in Britain. The Rushdie affair is very much a British affair. Rushdie is here, and we are here, and we are deeply involved. Of course, this is pulling the community together. It has brought an awareness to the community that the country they thought was a liberal society is not. It is the most intolerant society, and Britain has shown its intolerant face to us over the last few years.
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. Yasin, by the wise Quran, you are indeed one of the messengers.
Some of Bradford's Muslim women, concerned at intolerance but less bellicose about it, we found to be anti-Siddiqui. They choose to be active in their own way. One group meets to discuss the Quran, Islam's sacred book.
Islam is everything, and nothing is separate from Islam. Nothing is separate from our way of life, because Islam guides us as to how we should live and how we should please our Creator.
This group is also in process of organising a Muslim women's helpline with counselling and taking initiatives on education. These ladies are no doormats, but they do feel a sense of alienation, a rejection, they insist, not of their own making. In these circumstances, the surest identity that they found is with their religion.
In Islam, you're taught to be a good citizen, no matter what community or what society
rule
you're
you
living
live
in.
under, yes.
You're taught to participate in a very peaceful manner.
It's not so much on the Muslims' part that they feel that they feel any aggression or any frustration or any pressure or conflict towards the British community. I think rather we're on the receiving end. I mean, we're very happy to be in a British society.
I think we have a lot to contribute.
And we want to, and this is where we feel we're being hampered. People are virtually telling us, no, you're not good enough, you're backward people, you can't contribute. We're superior, we're intellectually superior, or because this is a common trend in the world, the materialist, Western world, this is the
image of Islam is always negative.
This is a way of life, and if you don't follow it, then you're not up to date.
Muslims, they are being persecuted all over the world simply because we are not united enough. There are so many Muslims in this world, and if they were united, then these problems they will be solved by themselves.
Yeah. Now the time has come for the Muslims to take up the issue in their own hands.
There is, rightly or wrongly, a strong sense of grievance in the Muslim community, which is being reflected in frequent demonstrations. This one in London was about the Muslims of Bosnia. And some of the critics feel that the host society here might well consider the beam in its own eye before beholding the mote in the eye of British Muslims.
They've tried, and they tried since the 50s, to be accepted and to go as far as they need to go in terms of changing, their lifestyles to fit in. They were rejected, they were rebuffed, they have been treated appallingly badly over the years. And so now many of them want to go the other way, which I don't think is possible. You can never go back to whatever this thing called roots is. What they're also asking questions about, and I have a lot of sympathy with this, is why should you integrate into a society where so many of its own social values are falling apart and creating chaos? So that I have a teenage boy who's 15, and if I was given a choice between him being a football hooligan, and I'm stereotyping now, and him being a fairly religious and obedient Muslim child, I know where my vote would go. And if that means I'm not integrating, well, fine.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas.
Straight from the shoulder. So, British Muslims pray for unity within the British nation. They're a disparate band, some locked still in a ghetto mentality, though Bosnia and the Rushdie saga are fostering a feeling of stronger religious identity. Fear is the great enemy. Their fears play into the hands of their own extremists, of the strident voices promoting fanaticism and bigotry. These, in turn, feed the old, half-awakened monster of racism in the British host society. Moderation in both host and minority communities has a clear common interest, if only to allay one nightmare vision now current, and I quote a Muslim writer, that next time there are gas chambers in Europe, there's no doubt concerning who'll be in them.